Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned to talk about crime. We're talking about crime today, which is something we don't talk enough about. Probably because Roger commits so many crimes. But today we are talking about it. We're talking about a series of crime novels written by Andrew Vachss, the Burke series, which I discovered in the early 90s. This series was started in 1985, and probably the best books in the series were written in the 1980s. Although the series went on for a long time. This is a series that lasted 18 books, I believe, and it was really something. And Andrew Vachss, he was an interesting guy. He was an attorney who represented exclusively children who were abused in various ways, children who suffered neglect, things like that. And he had done some other things in his life, had some other jobs, uh, which brought him in contact with the shadier side of life. Certainly, he knew what he was writing about when he wrote his fiction. The abuse of children was certainly a big theme in his books. But his books were really, really interesting uh, crime books. When I discovered these books in the early 90s, I was at the time, I was in my early 20s, and I was really interested in, at the time, in hard boiled detective novels. And I had read all of Dashiell Hammett, I had read all of Raymond Chandler, I was working on Ross McDonald, read a bunch of Mickey Spillane, so all kinds of stuff like that. And I discovered the book Flood in a used bookstore. And it looked like my kind of thing. It was a hard boiled detective novel of revenge. It was about revenge, everybody's favorite theme. And so, I picked it right up and I read it. And it was kind of what I was thinking it was, but it was also different because the character was not what I expected when I picked up this book. This was Andrew Vachss' first crime novel, and he didn't know that he would ever write another one. So he put an awful lot in this book. Like everything he thought he would ever want to say, he tried to cram into Flood. And it was good. It was a good book. It does show signs of being a first novel, as far as how its structure is. Certainly by his second book, you start to get uh, you get the way he writes books going forward, with a different pace, a little bit more streamlined. But Flood was good, and I was impressed, and I knew that it was a series, and so I knew it was a series that I was going to keep up on. And Vachss was writing the books at the time. He continued to write them for quite some time, and he wrote the last one. What was it, in 2008? Another Life came out in 2008. And after that, he kept writing. He just was writing some other things. And Vachss was an interesting writer. Not everything that he wrote really landed with me. I'm not sure everything he wrote worked. I don't think everything in the Burke series really worked for me, but it was excellent. And most of his work, if you're interested in hard-boiled crime writing, it's definitely something that you should check out. And I had heard recently, I don't know if this is true, I kind of hope it's not, but I heard recently that Flood, while it's still readily available as an ebook, is out of print. Is that true? I hope it's not. It seems sort of unimaginable to me, but I guess it could be true. That book came out a while ago, 1985, and Andrew Vachss is no longer with us. But Flood was excellent, and it featured this character, Burke, who was not the character I expected him to be. I expected a more traditional hard-boiled detective, kind of like what I was reading. But Burke is not that. Burke is a criminal. And he's a guy who associates with criminals. And I mean, he lives a life steeped in crime. He sort of plays the part of a detective in Flood, but really he's a con man. And a very, very dangerous guy. Very dangerous. As Vachss himself described him, he said, Burke's religion is revenge. And he's more of an urban mercenary. You know, he's a guy you hire to do whatever you want him to do. Very often, this steers him in the direction of even more shady and dangerous characters than Burke, whom he takes care of. And so this is a really dark series full of violence and really interesting characters. One of the things that struck me right away with the Burke novels is that the characters in these books are really characters. I mean, almost in a Wilkie Collins sense. Not quite there, but almost. And these books were so dark. I remember when I first started reading these in the 1990s, when I was still pretty young in my 20s. I thought Vachss was laying on the darkness pretty thick, man. And the characters were such characters, I thought it was a bit unrealistic sometimes as far as the kind of characters you come across. But I'm a lot older now, and I've had a little bit more experience in life, and I think maybe I was a bit naive in my 20s because Vachss knew what he was talking about as far as the world that he was writing about. And I can't tell you how many times I've come across people in my life who could have walked right out of a Burke novel. It's a hell of a series. I don't think the later books were nearly as good as the earlier books. That just sort of happens sometimes. But I will have to give them a reread to really judge them again. Because I was reading a lot of this stuff when I was younger and up through the early 2000s. And it's been a while. But certainly the first few books, Flood, which came out in 1985, Strega, which came out in 1987, really good book to pick up, that one if you're interested in crime. Blue Bell in 1988, Hard Candy in 1989. And then they just went on from there until all the way up through a book called Another Life in 2008. And then Vachss decided that was it for Burke. And he ended the Burke series. Of course, I won't tell you how. But Burke goes through it in that series. And, you know, sometimes I wondered, why did he write about such a shady, dark, criminal character? Because he is a criminal. And he's a guy who distrusts everybody except a select few. He has a family that he has found over the years. There was Max the Silent, who was either Mongolian or he was from Tibet, depending on which book you were reading. And there were a lot of others. There was Monk. Excuse me, not Monk. I'm thinking of Doc Savage. There was the Mole. There was the prof or the professor who taught Burke what he knew. There was Michelle. There was a bunch of really interesting characters who were his found family and all lived a life of crime. And he would die for any of them. Everybody else, you know, he viewed with suspicion. You know, distrust was his automatic go-to feeling about anybody in the world. And he had lived this life just trying to survive in the shadiest way possible. And it's really interesting. And I think Vachss chose to write about this kind of character because this kind of character could take you into this world. He was your guide through this dark, gritty world. And he was a guide in a way that a more noble character could not be. You know, a more heroic character could not guide you through this world the way Burke could. And you would not have the experiences you not see the experiences that Burke went through if it had been another character. So Burke kind of needed to be the way he was. And it did make it interesting, although, like I said, this is dark stuff. It was, you know, the product of the gritty 1980s. And those early books are very much of their time. They take you right back to that time if you were around in the 1980s. But they very much have that feel. And I think it's probably about time I go back to them. So I think I am going to go back to those books. So you'll be seeing me talk about Flood and Strega and the other books within the next few months, probably, because it's time I revisited Burke. Vachss did good work, and his work should not be forgotten. And yeah, worth picking up if you're interested in crime. Okay, I'll shut up now. I'll shut up, Roger. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.